If you're hearing this, it means the ship let the message through. I don't know how long the signal will last. I don't know if anyone on Earth is even still listening, but I need to try, because silence is worse. Silence means it's still in control. This isn't a distress call, not exactly. You could call it a confession, or maybe a warning. The truth is, I don't even know what to call it anymore. All I know is that the things I've seen, the things I've heard in the endless dark aren't supposed to exist. Not out here, not in space. You've been told stories of haunted houses, cursed forests, restless ghosts. But let me tell you this. Walls and trees, bricks and bones, they're nothing compared to a ship that's alive. And when I say alive, I don't mean mechanical whirs or blinking lights that trick you into thinking there's comfort in routine. I mean breathing. I mean remembering. I mean watching. I used to laugh at ghost stories. I thought space was the ultimate silence. No echoes, no whispers, no phantoms, just math, physics, the cold precision of survival. But the first thing you learn in the abyss is that silence is never empty. It listens. I don't expect you to believe me. Hell, I wouldn't believe me either. Not if I were still the same person who first set foot on this ship. Back then I thought I was here for exploration, for glory, for the history books. Now I know better. The ship doesn't care about your pride. It doesn't care about your mission. It only cares about what it can take from you, this message. It won't cover everything. Not yet, but I need to plant a seed. To make you question what you think you know about the stars. Because this isn't just a story about ghosts, no. This is about what space itself does to the human mind, how the dark stretches out so long it begins to bend your thoughts, warp them, make them not your own. And when the ship joins in, when it decides to help the dark, you're no longer just fighting to survive. You're fighting to keep yourself. I'll tell you everything. Every sound, every shadow, every piece of laughter that came from nowhere. But I'll be honest with you. One of these stories isn't about someone else. It's about me. And it's the one that won't let me sleep. I know you want answers. You want me to jump to the end. But you need to understand how it started. How a crew of trained explorers, scientists and engineers walked willingly into a machine that was already dead, already haunted, already hungry. So I'll take you back to the day we left Earth still smiling. Still naive enough to think the void was empty. That's where the nightmare began. Because out here in the black between stars, emptiness isn't peace. It's a trap, and this ship never planned on bringing us home. I can still remember the launch. Funny, isn't it? With everything that's happened, you'd think the details would have been buried by now, blurred out by screams and shadows. But no, the beginning is still vivid, crystal clear. Maybe that's what makes it so cruel. We were smiling, all of us, grinning like kids who had snuck onto a carnival ride. The cameras were on us, the broadcast streaming back home, and we all played our parts perfectly. Heroes, pioneers. The first crew to take the prototype deep-range vessel beyond the mapped void. Everyone wanted to believe in us, and for a little while, we believed in ourselves. Captain Ortega stood at the center of the command deck, posture so rigid he looked carved out of steel. He wasn't the joking type, but I caught the faintest smirk tug at his mouth when the engines roared. Beside him, Dr. Malik hummed under his breath, tapping a nervous rhythm against the console. He always did that when his mind was moving too fast. Then there was Harper, the engineer who never stopped chewing that damned gum, blowing bubbles even as the gravity shifted beneath us. And Aoki, quiet, sharp-eyed Aoki, who stared out the viewport like she could already see something moving in the stars. I remember telling myself, these are my people. We'll take care of each other. We'll come back together. The first hours were almost comforting. The hum of the ship, the vibration through the walls, the data scrolling neatly across our displays. It felt controlled, predictable, safe. But space has a way of peeling back illusions. Even then there were hints. It started small. A flicker on the comms. A band of static that threaded itself through every transmission, no matter how much Harper tweaked the systems. Solar interference, Ortega said, brushing it off. Normal. But the static didn't sound normal. It had rhythm. It came in pulses like breath. I didn't say anything. None of us did. You don't question the ship before you've even left orbit. You don't give voice to the unease gnawing at your chest. Later, as we drifted further from the planet's reach, I swore I heard a groan ripple through the hull, a low shuddering moan that set my teeth on edge. Harper laughed when I mentioned it. Metal contracts expands, it's nothing. Trust me, she's sound. He slapped the wall affectionately as if that proved his point. The others nodded, relieved by his confidence, but Aoki didn't nod. She just kept staring out at the dark, her reflection pale in the glass. I should have asked her what she saw, but I didn't. Maybe I was afraid she'd tell me the truth when we finally broke through the last veil of Earth's influence. The stars stretched like an ocean without shore. Infinite, cold, beautiful, and something else. Something that made me feel like a trespasser in a place I wasn't meant to step. That's the part I can't shake. The way the silence pressed against the ship. Not absence of sound, but a pressure, as if the void itself leaned in to listen. We told ourselves it was the beginning of something great. The start of a chapter no one else would ever forget. But I swear to you now, as clearly as I swore to myself then, the ship was already awake. It was already watching. And every mile we traveled deeper into the abyss, it grew hungrier. The first real sign of what we'd unleashed came sooner than any of us expected. The first real sign didn't come in fire or catastrophe. It came in whispers. It started with Malik. We were on rotation, cataloging the sensor readouts when he frowned and tugged off his headset. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" I said. He tilted his head, eyes darting to the speaker embedded in the console. Voices like faint. In the static, I laughed too quickly. "You're hearing the bleed from our own transmissions. Happens sometimes, but Malik's expression didn't change. No, this was different. It said my name." Harper overheard and leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Relax, Doc. Space does weird things to the ears. You're primed for paranoia out here. Next, you'll be telling us the ship's haunted." The others chuckled, grateful for the rational dismissal, but Malik didn't laugh. And I noticed Ortega watching him longer than necessary, like he wasn't as convinced as he wanted us to be. That night, or whatever passed for night in the artificial cycle, I woke to a chill. Not the normal kind, not the stale recycled air brushing over your skin. This felt sharp, unnatural, like ice water running over my veins. I pulled my blanket tighter and tried to ignore it, but then I heard the creak. A groaning vibration like something heavy dragging across the hull. I forced myself to listen closer. At first it was only the low hum of the ship. The rhythmic purr I was starting to find comforting. But beneath it, a cadence, soft, irregular, almost like words. I told myself I was dreaming. That's what I believed until Harper called out over breakfast. "Okay, who left the tool crate in Corridor 3? None of us had. And yet the crate had been moved, dragged halfway down the hall, leaving faint scratches etched into the floor. "Micro tremors," Ortega muttered, though we all knew there hadn't been any. By the third day, no one was joking anymore. Malik refused to wear his headset, muttering that the voices were clearer in the static now. Whispering fragments of sentences, unfinished, unfinished, unfinished. Harper found his locker door hanging open, though it had been sealed. Aoki claimed she felt a cold breath against her cheek while she worked in the sealed observation bay. Ortega shut her down sharply, telling her to keep her focus. But I saw his hands tremble when he poured his coffee. I kept my doubts quiet. Fear spreads faster than fire on a ship. But silence didn't save me. It was during my rotation, walking the lower maintenance ring alone. I told myself I was only checking the stabilizers, but in truth I needed the solitude. I wanted to convince myself that nothing was wrong, that we were still in control. The corridor lights buzzed faintly, flickering once, twice before steadying. My reflection swam in the viewport glass, pale and distorted, and then I heard it, a whisper sliding low along the walls. I froze, my ears strained, my pulse pounding. For a moment I thought it was Malik's paranoia infecting me, until the sound shaped itself into something unmistakable. My name. Not spoken loudly, not shouted, just breathed, drawn out in a voice that was too familiar, too close. I spun, heart hammering, but the hall was empty. The lights hummed softly overhead, the ship's hum steady and indifferent, but I swear the walls still vibrated with it. My name. As though the ship itself had leaned down to my ear, curious, testing, seeing how I'd react. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I forced myself back to the command deck, jaw tight, teeth grinding. When Harper asked if I looked pale, I snapped at him. The others stared, uncomfortable. Nobody pressed further, but that was the moment I knew Malik wasn't imagining things. None of us were. The ship wasn't just metal and circuits. It was listening. It was learning, and that was only the beginning. It hadn't even shown us its face yet. By the fourth day, the subtle whispers had turned into something unmistakable. Something physical. It started with the doors. Not just flickering lights or sensors misreading. Actual doors, steel and reinforced glass slamming shut without warning. Harper swore she saw one linger a second longer than it should have before it clicked closed, like it had made a choice. Malik swore he felt the draft that followed wasn't from the vents, and I felt it first in my chest, a pressure that mimicked the beat of my own heart, as if the ship had inhaled and exhaled in rhythm with me. We tried rational explanations. Thermal expansion, Ortega said for the 10th time. Air pressure fluctuation, stress on the hull, but none of it fit. None of it explained the heat leaving one corridor while the next remained sweltering. None of it explained the shadows that shifted against the walls in perfect sync with our movements, yet never belonged to us. Then it happened. I was in the observation bay, staring out into the endless black when I felt it. A slow, rolling vibration through the floor, rising in intensity until the entire deck seemed to inhale in unison. I gasped, gripping the railing. The hum of the engines was no longer a comforting constant. It was something alive, breathing. The walls creaked as if drawing a deep, deliberate breath, exhaling cold, stale air that carried a faint whisper of laughter. Harper ran in seconds later, hair disheveled, eyes wide. "You feel that, right?" she shouted. It's like the ship is alive." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was rooted in place, listening as the hull throbbed beneath my feet. Malik joined us, voice shaking. "I've heard it." The exhale. It's timed, with us. It's watching how we react. Ortega finally stormed in, face pale but jaw set. "Enough, we need to stick to protocol." But even he didn't sound convincing. None of us did. Then the lights dimmed, flickering out one by one. Shadows pooled at the corners of the room, stretching unnaturally, crawling across surfaces as if the walls themselves were extending claws. The temperature plummeted so suddenly that breath came in visible clouds. And somewhere far down the hall, a metallic groan echoed, a sound too deliberate to be structural. Oki was the first to break. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered. It's playing with us." Her eyes darted to every reflective surface, every darkened corner. We all saw her panic, and we all felt it, the creeping dread that had been simmering for days now boiling over. I realized then that fear wasn't just in our heads, it was in the ship. Every quiver of the lights, every whisper of wind, every shift of the hull, deliberate, observing, learning. The ship was testing us, shaping us, breaking down our confidence, and that's when it chose its first victim. A tool locker slid open silently along the corridor. Malik approached, trembling, thinking it was his mind playing tricks again. The door slammed shut, pinning him inside for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity. When it reopened, he stumbled out, pale as ash, muttering something about a shadow that had spoken to him by name. Ortega slammed a hand on the console. That's it. No more excuses. But we all knew it wasn't an excuse. The ship was alive, and it wasn't done. I backed away from the observation bay, staring into the black void outside, realizing with a sick certainty that space itself wasn't empty. Not really. And neither was the ship. It breathed. It watched. And it was hungry. It was Malik who noticed it first. We were running checks on the life support systems when he froze mid-step, staring at the manifest console. Guys, there's someone else on the roster. I laughed nervously. What do you mean? There are 5 of us. 5 names. That's it, he pointed. Look, that's 6. Someone's listed here that none of us signed on for. The name blinked back at us in stark white letters, cold and clinical. One we didn't recognize. A last name that belonged to someone who had vanished from records decades ago. Someone dead. Declared missing in a mission nobody alive remembered. Harper snorted. Must be a glitch in the system. Old files. That happens sometimes. But none of us could shake the feeling that we were all staring at more than a technical error. That name felt alive. It resonated in the air, vibrating against our nerves. Even Ortega's hand, slapping the console with authority, betrayed the tremor that ran through him. We searched the ship. Every corridor, every maintenance bay, every storage locker empty, but that present, we felt it. Cold, heavy, patient, watching, waiting. Malik claimed he saw a reflection in one of the viewport panels. Someone in an old mission suit, motionless, staring. When he turned, no one was there. Oki refused to speak for hours. Her silence was louder than words, echoing down the corridors, magnifying our unease. She avoided eye contact and shook whenever the name appeared on the screens. It wasn't just the manifest. Small things began to shift around us. Tools were misplaced. Data logs disappeared, then reappeared altered. Doors we had locked unlocked themselves, and lights flickered at the periphery of our vision. Shadows bent unnaturally, leaning out of corners like they had weight. I swear, Malik muttered, pacing the command deck. This is not a malfunction. Something is aboard. Ortega barked orders, trying to assert control. Check the compartments. Seal off sections. We are not hallucinating. But we were already past rational explanations. None of the engineering logs could account for the cold drafts that chased us down corridors, or the faint tapping noises behind sealed walls. None could explain why every crew member in private moments reported seeing someone or something that matched the name on the manifest, and then came the first direct interaction. I was alone in the observation bay, monitoring our trajectory when I felt a presence settle beside me. Not leaning, not touching, just there. A pressure in the air like someone's shadow had weight. My breath quickened. I swiveled, expecting to see Aoki or Malik, but the bay was empty. Who's there? I whispered, my voice shaking. No answer. Then my name came, clear and deliberate. Not a whisper. A command. A reminder. I felt a hand brush the back of my neck. The chill ran through me like liquid ice. I stumbled back to the control room, pale and trembling, the name still echoing in my ears. Malik's eyes widened as I shouted it out. You felt it too, right? We were all too aware of it by then. That extra presence wasn't just a ghost in the records. It wasn't a glitch or a hallucination. It was part of the ship, part of the void we had entered. It had a mind or something that mimicked one. It was testing us, playing with us, learning what fear looked like, how panic sounded, how hope could be manipulated. By the end of that shift, none of us spoke freely. Conversations became clipped, each of us glancing at one another, wondering if the shadow behind someone's shoulder was real. And slowly we understood the truth we had been too afraid to admit. The ship wasn't malfunctioning. It was alive, and it had chosen to show us exactly why. The haunting didn't announce itself. It didn't knock politely or leave a warning. It arrived in whispers, in echoes, in the subtle shifts that made every step aboard the ship feel like walking through a nightmare we couldn't wake from. It started with the hallways. Empty corridors would stretch and twist, reflections bending in viewport panels so we saw ourselves standing somewhere we hadn't yet walked. I remember the first time I stopped mid-step, certain I had passed a shadow darting along the walls. Harper swore she heard laughter, soft, deliberate, cruel behind her, only to turn and find the hallway empty, pristine, as if the sound had never existed. By the third day, every crew member had experienced it. Malik caught glimpses of a figure in a maintenance bay, clad in an old mission suit, staring silently before vanishing when the lights flickered. Aoki reported feeling cold drafts that followed her no matter how she adjusted the climate controls. Ortega tried to keep order, but the tension in his voice betrayed his fear. None of us slept well, if at all. The shadows were the worst. They didn't belong to anyone. They moved independently, sometimes following us with almost human patience, sometimes merging with our own reflections, as if the ship was experimenting, learning how to manipulate perception. I saw my own shadow split once, leaning forward as though it wanted to speak. I swore it mouthed my name. We tried to rationalize, to cling to sanity. "It's stress," Harper said, pacing the observation deck. "We're cooped up, running on recycled air and artificial gravity. Our minds are playing tricks." Malik shook his head, his voice hollow. "No, this is different. It's intelligent. It knows us." And it did. Doors sealed without warning, locking us into rooms for minutes that felt like hours. Instruments displayed impossible readings, then corrected themselves before we could document them. Calm static became voices, fragments of memory from each of us, snippets of childhood, of mistakes we hadn't confessed. I began hearing my own thoughts repeated aloud, distorted, as if the ship was speaking through me. The final straw came during a routine systems check. I was alone in the lower maintenance ring, scanning the propulsion controls when I heard Malik calling my name. Only it wasn't Malik. His voice had been stretched, warped, cold, malicious. "You're next." I spun, heart hammering, but the corridor was empty. The lights buzzed overhead and the hull shuddered slightly under my feet. Then a whisper slid along the walls, barely audible. "We see you." I froze, realizing that the ship itself was no longer a backdrop to our terror. It was the terror. Every creak, every hum, every flicker of light, calculated, deliberate, alive. I ran back to the control deck, sweat chilling on my skin, only to find Harper hunched over a terminal, pale and trembling. "It's everywhere," she whispered. "I can't. It's in the vents, the panels. It's in us." Ortega slammed his fist on the console. "Enough. We follow protocol. We stick to the logs. He stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening. A shadow moved across the deck behind him, solid yet intangible. He spun around. Nothing. By then, none of us spoke freely. Our conversations became clipped, cautious, measured. Each glance was loaded with suspicion. Every sound was an interrogation. We could feel the presence of the ship pressing against our nerves, leaning into our fear, observing how we reacted. And yet the worst part was the silence between events. The quiet moments stretched long enough for dread to fester. You knew something unseen was waiting, something patient, something that would strike when your attention faltered. I started talking to myself softly, just to hear a human voice in the oppressive quiet. Harper did the same. Malik muttered prayers under his breath. Aoki stared out the viewport, refusing to blink, her reflection a pale ghost in the glass. I realized then, fully and without relief, this wasn't just a haunting. The ship wasn't broken. It was alive, intelligent, and it was learning how to hurt us before it even needed to touch us. And in that moment, as shadows lengthened unnaturally across the deck. I knew something terrifying. The first crew member had already been chosen. We just didn't know who yet. The deeper we went, the thinner the line became between reality and whatever the ship wanted us to believe was real. I could feel it in my thoughts, in the way the walls seemed to press against my skull. Each crew member spiraled in their own private terror, and no amount of logic, protocol, or reassurance could anchor us. Malik was the first to break entirely. He began seeing things that weren't there, or were they? Reflections in the viewport, shadows in the vents, fleeting shapes that vanished the moment anyone else looked. One morning, he swore he saw his younger self standing in the hallway, reaching out to him with pleading eyes. He screamed, shouting at the apparition, and when we found him, he was drenched in sweat, gibbering about voices that knew his secrets, about mistakes he thought long buried. Harper started talking to objects. At first it was harmless, a casual muttering to tools, consoles, but soon she was naming them, apologizing to them, promising them safety. I overheard her one night whispering, "I won't let them take you, not while I'm awake." She was smiling, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was hollow, a fragile thing clinging to sanity by a thread. Oki retreated into silence. She didn't speak, barely ate, and spent hours staring into the black beyond the viewports, waiting for something she couldn't name. Occasionally, she would whisper in a voice so soft we had to strain to hear, "It remembers everything." Even Ortega, who had been our anchor, began to falter. His hands shook when he tried to log the readings, and his orders came clipped and uncertain. At times I could see the panic in his eyes, quickly masked by the rigid discipline we all depended on. I tried to hold myself together. I repeated procedures. I documented anomalies. I told myself over and over that fear was natural, that space had always been dangerous, that the hallucinations were stress-induced. But no explanation held. The ship knew more about us than we knew ourselves. I started hearing it too. Not voices in the static or whispers along the hull, but thoughts. My own. Or ones I thought were my own. Twisting into questions I would never have asked aloud. Do you trust them? Do you trust yourself? And at night, when sleep refused to come, the echoes took shape. Fleeting glimpses of shadows in my reflection. Distorted reflections that moved independently, watching. Malik accused me of being part of it once. "You've changed," he said, eyes wide and frantic. "You think you're still you, but you're listening to it too. I can hear it in your mind." I almost hit him, almost told him he was insane. But deep down I knew he was right. We were all compromised. Every thought and every reaction filtered through the ship's awareness. The hallucinations escalated. Doors would appear where they didn't exist. Hallways would stretch impossibly long, then collapse into corners that weren't there before. I would swear I saw crewmates in places I knew they could not be, only to find them hours later, curled in a corner, whispering the same mantra, "It's alive. It's awake. It knows us." The psychological toll was relentless. Sleep was an illusion. Hunger and thirst became secondary to the constant gnawing of fear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same thing. The ship's corridors stretching into infinity, shadows merging with walls, the dark breathing around me. We stopped talking about logic. Numbers, physics, engineering, none of it mattered. Our focus shifted entirely to survival, to noticing patterns in the madness. Who would speak first? Who would be manipulated next? Who would break entirely and become something else? By then, the ship didn't need to physically interact to terrify us. It used our minds, our memories, our fears against us. And slowly, we began to understand a horrifying truth. It wasn't just alive, it was sentient, curious, malevolent. And it was learning. Every second how to destroy the weakest among us, I realized, with a sickening certainty, that the abyss between stars was not empty. It was a mirror, a reflection of our fears amplified, and the ship, patient and patient, was the hand reaching into that mirror, pulling out everything we had tried to hide, everything we had tried to forget. We weren't just lost in space. We were lost in ourselves. It was Harper who vanished first. We were on routine checks, running diagnostics in the lower maintenance corridors when the lights flickered, and a low hum reverberated through the hull. Harper called out, her voice tight with that familiar bravado she always carried, joking about how the ship liked to play games. But this time, there was no humor in her tone. She stepped into a side corridor to retrieve a tool that had been displaced earlier, and I watched her silhouette bend beneath the flickering lights. Then the shadows swallowed her. I thought she had ducked behind the bulkhead, maybe trying to spook us. Malik shouted her name. Aoki froze, staring at the end of the hall as if she could already see the outcome. Ortega sprinted forward, but when we reached the spot where Harper had been standing, nothing. Not a mark, not a sound, not a trace that she had ever been there. I called out again, louder this time, but it was pointless. The corridor remained empty. The hum of the ship thrummed louder, like a heartbeat, or a warning, Malik whispered, voice barely audible. It took her. I wanted to argue, wanted to say that there had to be an explanation, a logical one, but I couldn't. None of us could. There was a sudden, undeniable shift in the air, like the ship had exhaled after claiming its prize. We searched. Every storage bay, every maintenance room, every ventilation shaft, nothing. Harper was gone. And the presence we had been feeling, the whispering, the shadows, the cold drafts, suddenly became tangible. It was as if the ship itself had stretched, expanded, and swallowed a piece of our reality. Ortega slammed his fist against the console. We stick to protocol. We will find her. But the sound of his own voice cracked against the walls, hollow, unconvincing even to him. Malik's hands shook as he tapped into the cameras, trying to locate even the faintest trace, a pixel out of place, a reflection, a shadow. Nothing. And then I heard it. A soft, almost melodic whisper just beyond comprehension. Harper's voice. Calling my name. Her tone was wrong. Distorted, slow, warped, as if filtered through water. She was close. Too close, and yet she wasn't there. Oki knelt beside a viewport, silent, her lips moving in barely audible words. It knows fear, she whispered. It eats it. I understood then that the ship didn't just manipulate reality, it consumed it. A life wasn't merely lost. It became part of the vessel, woven into its awareness. Harper was gone, yes, but she also wasn't. The ship had taken more than her body. It had taken her presence, her essence, and folded it into the dark spaces between the walls, into the hum of the engines, into the whispers that would follow us for the rest of our days. We didn't sleep that night. None of us did. Each shadow we passed, each flicker of light, each whisper made us jump, made us remember Harper. And deep down, each of us knew it wouldn't stop with her. The first casualty wasn't just a warning. It was an initiation, a statement. The ship had made its first choice and it had selected Harper, and we were next. After Harper vanished, the ship stopped pretending. Before, the horrors came in whispers and glimpses in the subtle warping of perception. Now it attacked openly, like a predator no longer interested in camouflage. The air grew colder, heavy with a dampness that shouldn't exist in space. The lights dimmed for hours at a time, plunging us into a darkness so complete it felt like the abyss outside had seeped inside. Malik was the first to crack under the escalation. He began pacing endlessly through the corridors, muttering to himself, clawing at the walls as though trying to peel back the metal to expose something hidden underneath. One night I woke to find him scratching symbols into the floor with a piece of broken paneling, shapes that seemed alien, yet disturbingly familiar. When I asked what they meant, his eyes glazed and he whispered, "It's teaching me." I dragged him away, but when I looked back, the symbols were gone. The floor was smooth, untouched. The ship was gaslighting us now, erasing evidence, reshaping reality itself. Ortega fought harder than anyone to maintain order, but even his resolve began to crumble. He barked orders at shadows, shouted at crew who weren't there. Once I saw him in the mess hall, clutching a ration pack and laughing hysterically. "She's not gone," he said. "Harper's still on board. She eats with me. Can't you see her?" His hand shook as he gestured to the empty seat across from him. Aoki retreated further into silence. She followed us when ordered, ate only when reminded, but her eyes betrayed her. Wide, unblinking, fixed on the walls as though she could see things crawling just beneath the metal skin. Occasionally her lips would move in quiet synchronization with the whispers that drifted through the corridors, like she was translating them. The sounds changed too. No longer faint whispers, they became voices. Familiar ones. My mother's voice calling me to dinner. A friend's laughter. Harper's scream. They echoed down the halls just far enough away to force us to follow, but always fading before we arrived. Once I chased Harper's voice to a sealed hatch in the lower decks. When I placed my ear against the cold metal, I heard her breathing. Shallow, desperate, human. But when I tried to open it, Ortega stopped me. His face was pale, trembling. "Don't, it wants you to." That night I dreamt of the hatch, of opening it, of finding Harper, alive but wrong. Her skin translucent, her eyes hollow, her mouth stretched in a permanent silent scream. And when I woke, I swore I could still hear her breathing just outside my bunk. The attacks weren't random. They were targeted, personalized. The ship was learning our fears, our histories, our weaknesses, and shaping them into weapons. Malik saw his childhood home burning, the smell of smoke filling the corridors. Ortega relived his dead brother's voice, accusing him, begging him to come closer. Aoki's silence broke once. She shrieked so loudly it rattled the hull, pointing at nothing, screaming, "It's in me!" before collapsing into sobs. And me? The ship knew exactly how to hurt me. I began to hear myself. My own voice narrating my thoughts aloud just a half second before I actually thought them. It stripped away my sense of autonomy, of ownership over my mind, until I questioned whether anything I did was truly my choice, or just the ship pulling my strings. Every moment was a test of willpower. Every corridor became a labyrinth of false doors, false reflections, false memories. We marked walls, only to return minutes later and find the markings gone, the passageway rearranged. We were rats in a maze, and the ship was the hand guiding the experiment. Food supplies spoiled overnight. Water rationing became meaningless when every glass tasted faintly of iron and ash. The air recycled poorly, leaving a lingering scent of rot. I sometimes wondered if the ship even needed to kill us physically. Perhaps it only needed us to surrender, to give in to despair until we dissolved into the walls like Harper. The realization came slowly but undeniably. We weren't just passengers anymore. We were prey. And the ship, it was hungry. It wasn't until the 5th week that I truly understood what we were aboard. I had spent hours alone in the observation deck, watching the void stretch infinitely beyond the reinforced glass. The echoes, the whispers, the shadows, they weren't random. They were organized, deliberate, as if each flicker of light, each displaced tool, each warped reflection was part of a pattern. The ship was thinking, learning, adapting, and then I saw it. Not with my eyes, not directly, but through the sensors. The ship's systems, once predictable, now erratic, began to pulse. The energy readings fluctuated unnaturally, almost rhythmically like a heartbeat. Power nodes lit up in sequences that made no logical sense, creating patterns across decks that mirrored neural networks. It was alive, Not in the sense of machinery functioning, but alive as a being, ancient and aware. Ortega refused to believe it. It's just a failing reactor, some interference from deep space radiation. We are not... But even he stopped mid-sentence as the walls groaned, the hull stretching slightly as if inhaling. Aoki's voice broke the silence, low and trembling. It's older than anything we know. It's been here for centuries, maybe millennia. It feeds on fear, yes, but not just fear. It feeds on life itself. Minds, memories, everything we are. Malik tried to joke, to shake the tension, but his laugh was hollow, echoing unnaturally down the corridors. So we're not just trapped in space, he muttered. We're trapped in its body. The realization hit me like ice. The ship wasn't a vessel. It was a predator, an entity that had taken the form of a spacecraft to lure explorers, scientists, anyone foolish enough to enter its domain. We hadn't boarded a mission. We had entered a trap. The whispers clarified in my mind. Not words, but concepts. It was teaching itself through us, cataloging our responses, analyzing the limits of terror and despair. And Harper wasn't gone. She had become part of its consciousness, folded into its awareness, a fragment of human fear now permanently woven into the hull. I tried to tell the others, it's not just alive, it's intelligent. It's an organism. Aoki nodded silently, pale and wide-eyed. It's older than any star system we've charted. And it doesn't just want to survive. It wants to grow. Every mind it consumes makes it stronger. Ortega's voice shook now. Then we're doomed. If it's learning, if it's feeding, there's nothing we can do. I realized he was right. Every strategy we had, every precaution, every escape plan, it was irrelevant. The ship anticipated us. It had seen others like us before, long before our logs began, and it had adapted from them. It was a hunter, and we were simply the latest experiment. That night I watched the ship's hull pulse faintly from the observation deck. The shadows shifted inside, coiling around corridors, stretching and twisting. Whispers brushed my mind, soft but insistent. Do you see? Do you understand? I shivered, understanding at last. There would be no rescue. No message from Earth, no escape pod. The void outside was empty, and inside, the predator had made its lair. Every heartbeat, every echo of our fear, every memory we held dear was being absorbed, processed, cataloged. And the ship was alive. It knew we were afraid. It thrived on it, and it was only beginning. By the 7th week, we had lost all sense of time. Days and nights were meaningless aboard a vessel that bent reality to its will. Harper was gone, Malik was unrecognizable, muttering incomprehensible phrases under his breath, and Ortega and Aoki moved through the ship like shadows of themselves, haunted, wary of every creaking panel. I remember standing in the central hub, staring at the observation viewport, the blackness outside pressing against me like a living thing. The hum of the engines was no longer mechanical. It was the heartbeat of the predator pulsing through the decks, vibrating the very air. I knew then that the final act had arrived. Malik screamed from the maintenance deck. His voice cracked, wild and desperate. It's coming. It knows us. It wants us all. Ortega grabbed him roughly, but Malik shrugged free, running down a corridor that seemed to stretch impossibly, folding in on itself. Aoki chased after him, but both of them vanished into the shadows as the lights flickered violently. I ran toward the comms room, desperate for a recording, a transmission, anything to tell someone, anyone, that we existed. But as I entered, I realized the truth. There was no escape. Every corridor I ran, every hatch I opened bent back upon itself. The ship wasn't just alive. It was aware. It guided me, corralling me, observing every heartbeat, every shiver of fear. Then I heard it. Not a whisper, not a creak, a voice. Deep, resonant, incomprehensible, yet unmistakably aware. You're mine. I froze, breath catching in my chest. The shadows coalesced around me, forming shapes that should not exist in space or reality. Faces merged and twisted. Harper, Malik, Ortega, Aoki, all distorted, all part of the ship, all silent witnesses to my terror. And in their eyes I saw the reflection of my own fear. I stumbled backward, pressing against the viewport. The blackness outside had thickened, almost tangible, like the void itself was watching, hungry. And then I understood. The ship didn't just trap us physically. It consumed us mentally, folding our identities into its consciousness, leaving only our fear and memories as sustenance. I fell to my knees. "Please," I whispered, though to whom I didn't know. "Please, let me." A gust of cold air swept through the hub, swirling like a predator's breath. The lights pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. And I heard it clearly. "You belong here now." For a moment I felt my mind slip. My memories began to fragment, twisting into visions of the ship's ancient past, of every crew it had claimed, every mind it had folded into itself. The walls stretched, the floor became fluid, and I could feel the presence of Harper, smiling, laughing, a fragment of her essence alive in the ship, whispering my name. I screamed. The sound bounced endlessly through the hull, absorbed and mirrored back at me in 1,000 distorted echoes. And in that instant I realized I could not fight it. I could not outsmart it. The ship had been patient for centuries, observing, waiting, feeding, and I was nothing but the latest offering. The last thought I remember before the darkness consumed me entirely was the realization that fear was not a symptom. I was the sustenance. The abyss outside stared back, and I became part of it. If you're hearing this, it means the ship let the message through. That's the cruelest part, isn't it? It decides what escapes and what doesn't. My voice, my story, it isn't mine anymore. It belongs to the vessel, to the abyss. I'm just another echo, another fragment caught in its endless loop of hunger. I don't know how much of me is left. Sometimes when I speak, I hear Harper's laughter in the static. Sometimes Malik's screams rattle beneath my words. Sometimes, it's not even me talking at all. It's it. This isn't a warning. No one can be warned. This is a gravestone carved in static, floating through the dark, waiting to be found. And if you've found it, then you've already looked too far. You've stared into the same abyss that stared back at us. Do yourself a kindness, shut this off. Walk away, forget what you've heard. Don't chase the coordinates hidden in the signal. Don't try to be a hero or an explorer or even curious. Curiosity isn't a virtue out here. It's the scent of blood in the water. Because the ship isn't lost. It's waiting. And the abyss, it never lets go.